My name is Matthew Todd and welcome to Inside the Scale Up. This is the podcast for founders and executives in tech looking to make an impact and learn from their peers within the tech business. We lift the lid on tech businesses, interviewing leaders and following their journey from startup to scale up and beyond, covering everything from developing product market fit, funding and fundraising models to value proposition structure and growth marketing. We learn from their journey so that you can understand how they really work, the failures, the successes, the lessons along the way, so that you can take their learnings and apply them within your own startup or scale up and join the ever-growing list of high-growth UK SaaS businesses. Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. Pleased to have you today. I'm pleased to be joined by Dan Sodergren from Your Flock. Good morning, Dan. Great to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew, for inviting me. Most kind.
Yeah, really looking forward to a chat this morning, finding out more about your background, Your Flock. And I know there's a few interesting points that we identified in our brief chat before the call that we want to talk about. But let's kick things off with a bit of an intro from yourself. Tell us a bit about yourself and your company, if you can.
Yeah, no problem. I have the joy of, I train corporate companies sometimes in digital transformation and marketing and some other things. So I have the joy of I'll make sure it's not the same intro because that lasts for about 6 minutes and needs a PowerPoint presentation. So I won't do that. So my name's Dan Sodergren. You can find me, just search Dan Sodergren. There aren't actually that many of us. So just Dan and then Sodergren. If you want to have a look and see that I'm not lying about my intro. So I've had the joy of doing digital transformation and things around company culture for quite a while. I was kind of a bit of a prophet in the wilderness pre-COVID, and I was telling people that the future. The thing is, I have the joy or otherwise of being called a tech futurist, and I always joke that a tech futurist, that's just someone who does stuff before everybody else does, and it doesn't mean that I'm rich, because if it was, I wouldn't be called a tech futurist. I'd be called very rich. They just go, you're a very rich entrepreneur, Mr. Sodergren. Congratulations. I'd say, yes, thank you. I have several companies. But I have had several companies. I've had about 10 different companies, and they tend to be, before other people did stuff. So I had an augmented reality company 12 years ago, way before, AR and stuff kind of really, it's the first wave, the first hype wave of AR, Matthew, as I'm sure you know. So the BBC picked me up and called me a tech futurist. And because I've been right about lots of stuff, I have the joy of being asked by companies to come in and teach them about things about the future. And one of those things, because I was talking about it 10 years ago, was about the future of work. And so I have the joy, again, I'm very lucky that I've been asked to a TED Talk, which is about to come out about the future of work. And I've been asked to go on lots of podcasts and lots of different things. And that's what I mainly talk about now. I used to talk about the future of digital marketing. And on the BBC stuff, I'm known as, I think it's tech expert and digital marketing expert, or tech and digital marketing expert, which is good. It's good. And my mum's very happy about being able to tell her tennis partners or whatever that Dan's been on telly again. I think to be fair, if I'm honest, Matthew, a lot of my family are pretty bored of me being on telly now, and to be fair, I don't need to get up that early myself. So I now run around the country. Obviously, post COVID, I get asked to go and do keynotes for different things, and what I normally talk about is about this future of work thing, which has got very, very fashionable, very, very quickly, of course, post-COVID and because of COVID and the pandemic. But all those things that were happening in the past were already the seeds in the ground. All that COVID's done is just sped this up. So we've had 10 years of advancement in a couple of years. But of course, that 10 years of advancement has caught a lot of people off guard. And so you can now get this situation where, companies that weren't remote first are remote forced. And so you get this, I think now, fascinating couple of years ahead of us where it's going to be really interesting to see, and I don't mean the kind of the fake really interesting, I'd actually mean critical, almost life and death of some companies, because they'll find it amazingly tricky to keep employees engaged whilst they're doing hybrid work or even going fully remote, because they were remote forced and they don't actually have the infrastructure and the capacity really to go into remote, which is of course why so many companies are trying to get people back in the offices.
Absolutely.
Complete caveat, obviously, to start off with. I think it's something like 35% of people can't remote work anyway. Or you could even now maybe say 50% of people can't remote work because of the works they do. You can't remote work being a barman. You can't remote work being a doctor. Well, actually, we've actually found you can do a lot of, you can remote work being a doctor actually, and you can remote work being a lawyer, and you can remote work doing lots of things. But, people always say, oh, what about airline pilots? No, okay. So you can't fly but actually people do fly planes remotely. They're called drones. So, even the things that we think are untouchable, we're going to find that so many more people can remote work. And the reason why I'm so passionate about it is because remote work allows us to be so much more diverse and inclusive than it did before. Having an office space, having all this kind of stuff around. Not only that, but it's so much better for the environment, Matthew. It's something the equivalent of, if half of us did remote work half the time, it's like the equivalent of 6 million cars off the road. I'm an old environmentalist, so I've been trying to talk about the environment for 20 years or so, and trying to get people to try to do stuff differently, and people wouldn't. Yeah. I had to go down to London to do meetings and literally have a meeting for an hour and then come back from London. Well, now we just do Zooms. VCs do Zoom calls in San Francisco. It used to be you'd have to fly to San Francisco. Literally, I've done that before for companies, or fly to Hong Kong, have a meeting for 2 hours. Imagine the economic, but also environmental impact of that. It's just insane, yeah? So I'm a great believer, and I'm a great advocate and champion of remote work. But I'll try not to rant. But that's why, because the green's good.
No, definitely. And I think it's really interesting. And I think, like you say, it's an accelerant.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's an accelerant. I mean, COVID, there's lots of stuff that's happened, and it's happened for the wrong reasons, sadly. So I would much prefer that we didn't have to have a global pandemic which killed millions of people, for people to realise that they didn't have to go into office spaces, didn't have to travel down to London to do their job. We've already had the technology's been here forever. Zoom's been around for quite a while. If it wasn't Zoom, it was GoToWebinar. I was doing webinars 15 years ago. I mean, it's not the technology which is the problem. The problem, you could argue broadband, because broadband wasn't as good and people's houses wasn't as good. True, but it was still good enough to do this, but we weren't doing it. So what I find fascinating as a technology specialist is, in this version of the world, it isn't the technology which is the leading factor. It's actually people. It's how people do stuff. And that's changed fundamentally. This is the thing, Matthew, I think, because the world has changed, and because the way people are now doing things, and I've got to be careful with words, because I don't mean the whole world. I do mean the Western world. I do mean the developed countries, and I do mean most probably 20% of the world's population. So we've got to realise how privileged we are when we can say this. But most people listening to this podcast will be under that banner. And so I say it with the caveat, knowing that, no, I get it. There's people that work in mines, absolutely. And the world, we are very lucky to be in a world where we can do Zoom calls, totally, and have broadband, have electricity, have more than $5 a day, totally with you. But the big change that's happened, this remote work revolution, that will fundamentally change the dynamics of the employee and employer relationship in the Western world. And I say Western again, I could say developed, but both words are particularly wrong. Let's say the privileged world. But that's a big thing, because the privileged world, drives the economy for a lot of the other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how then does this kind of passion for, the future of work, remote work, hybrid working, how does that relate to your flock then?
Well, yeah, the passion for the project, which happened many years ago, is because so Your Flock itself is a team dynamics tool, which works particularly well at keeping teams together for longer, which works brilliantly well for hybrid work and remote working. Yeah, it's just complete luck. I've got to be, as a futurist, sometimes you can sort of hold your hands up and say, "Hey, that was just luck." Yeah, I've had green hemp t-shirt companies 25 years ago. That was before its time. AR company, but had an algorithmic company before algorithms really existed. And it just happens that, to be the complete truth of this, Michal Wisniewski, who's my business partner and my co-founder, he's the brains behind Your Flock. And he thought of this idea, and it's very similar to an idea I tried about 7 years beforehand. So actually, I bumped into Michal at an event, and he told me this, and I was like, oh my God, I tried to make that years ago. And I had a bit of spare cash. So I was like, look, I can invest in your company. I'm going to go off and do my corporate talks. I'll invest in Your Flock and invest some time into it. I think at the time it was called Macaulay rather than Your Flock. And we'll see where it goes. And so it was just really lucky. It was an old business mentor of mine that said to me, well, you keep doing things ahead of time. Well, if that's the case, look back at your old notes. see what you were going to do 7 or 8 years ago, and then invest in a company doing that. And that's exactly what yes, it's exactly what I did. It was a stolen idea. Yeah, really good advice. Thank you. I won't say the name of the gentleman for name dropping purposes, but yes, thank you, sir. It's all I'll say. Thank you.
Yeah. So so then for that idea, then 7 years ago, and then bringing Your Flock to life now, then how does Your Flock help those teams, and how is it helping those teams stay together?
Well, yeah, it's based on lots of research that was done in originally in Stanford, and then brought over. Mihail did his thesis in this, and it was then finished at one of our first investors was Manchester University, who trialed it, and it worked. And basically, what happens is you do Your Flock survey, and the Your Flock survey then shows you what values you have. There's 9 different values, and it creates a little values map, for you personally. But if you then do the same, but with all your team members, you then get a team map. And that team map then shows you where people align and where they don't. And that alignment of values, and this is not culture fit, this is really important. Culture fit is a bad thing. Values fit is a good thing, but culture fit is actually quite damaging. Okay. It's like monoculturalism. It's not a good thing. Now, if you know this area well, you'll know things like Belbin, which is about different team roles and other things, or there's Myers-Briggs, or there's DISC, and there's all these different things you can do, Cosmo quizzes and all the rest of it. But the thing with Your Flock is because it goes for your values, which are deeper than the rest of it. You want to have a team that share similar values. Now, these values are things like teamwork, autonomy, customer focused, detail driven, these kind of things. They're not kind of green values. They're not the kind of, they're not the brand values. Yeah, they're deeper than that. They're not brand values. And we always get asked at Your Flock, can we change them to our brand values? And the answer is no, because the brand values are things that are stipulated, which are on top of all this. And to be fair, most of the time, brand values are not adhered to anyway by their behaviours. So the deeper thing is it's around the values. If you can find a team that shares similar values, then they stay together for longer. And you can literally see, because the reason why I invested in Your Flock is because a friend of mine's firm used it in their business. And if they'd listened to the Your Flock advice, it would have saved them about £100,000. Because they employed the wrong person at the wrong time with the wrong team. And the machine said, we believe that person will leave. That person did leave, and they left within 6 months, and it cost them £100,000 to replace them, and sort of a whole host of other problems. So I was like, look, I'm all in. I don't know how it works. It seems to be magical. At the time, I didn't understand the algorithm and didn't understand the rest, because I'm not tech and not on the human design side. But that's why I invested. So I like the product so much that I invested in it, and Your Flock now helps a variety of different folk. We specialise where we began, actually. We specialise in law firms and in professional services, especially legal teams of about 10 to about 100 people. And it works particularly well with those kind of folk. And the reason why it works particularly well with lawyers is because lawyers are finding this transition into hybrid work or into remote work very tricky themselves as a community, but also they have a very high churn rate, employee turnover rate, almost naturally. And what Your Flock does, it's around, we just got the data back from another client, so we can now say it's about 27%. We reduce employee churn by about 27%, which might not sound very exciting, but
that sounds like a lot.
It is. No, thank you. Yeah, it is. It's exciting. Thank you. Yeah, it is. It's amazing. Yeah. It is. It's like more than a quarter, which means that it literally saves you thousands of pounds. But actually, when you look at recruitment costs and all the other things, it actually saves you hundreds of thousands of pounds. And Your Flock doesn't cost £100,000 at all. So we're very lucky because it's software as a service, because we use machine learning and do some other clever things, and because we got investment from the government and some other great people. We've got a great board and some great advisors that create the learning development modules behind it. We can offer it at a very, very, very low cost compared to what you surely traditionally do with a consultancy and some other things. So it's almost pennies in the pound. So yeah, that's why. And that's, but for me, it's not about, and again, I've got to be careful with words because our investors will be listening. It is about the money, of course it is, but it's actually, for me, it's not about the money. It's actually about how do you help more people be happier at work? And that's my kind of mission is, how can I help 1 million people be happier at work? Because I think if you help people be happier at work, then the world itself becomes a better place. Because happiness, without being too hippie about it, happiness and being engaged at work is our kind of secret source for productivity. And there's so many studies now that prove the more happy you are at work, the more productive you are. And it ranges from people saying it's like 20 adds 20% to your bottom line to much, much higher. And there are great companies like the Happiness Index and loads of other folk that are doing great work in this space that can prove it all with the data and the other stuff. But for us, really, for me, it's a slightly more, I won't say spiritual, but it's slightly deeper reason. I want to, if we can make the world a happier place, I think we can make the world a better place.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great mission and set of values behind that. And as you say, with the kind of the fallout from the pandemic so far, it is forcing hybrid working as the new norm. And I think, something along the lines of what you've described is definitely needed. And one thing I'd like your kind of opinion on that. I've heard a lot of companies kind of struggling with trying to manage this hybrid scenario. Should we let people go fully remote? Should we mandate when they come into the offices? They've noticed a change in, what they would describe as company culture, in that, for some subset of their employees, it can almost turn into, well, you can do your work whenever you need to do it. So then they're happy to offer that flexibility as part of remote and hybrid working. But what they've seen is an increase in staff churn, because for some staff, they're saying, well, actually, when they were in the office, they felt like they were part of something and it was a fun place to be. It was an engaging place to be. But now it's just like they've got a to-do list. So they've kind of almost regressed back to, these are my skills, this is my to-do list. And do I want to do this, if it's marketing or whatever it may be, do I want to do this to-do list for this company? Or look, I could go over there and get paid more to do the same to-do list.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a couple of things, isn't there? And again, you can look at the data, and the data, this is for me, it's always the case for me, in God we trust, but everyone else must bring data. Yeah. So one of the rich moments of this whole future of working is everyone's got an opinion, and rightly so, because it's our work, it's what we do. Yeah. So everyone goes, oh, well, blah, 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 or we talk about productivity, and productivity actually went up, not down with this remote work revolution. It's the opposite. So when the bosses are saying, well, we need people back in the office because we want them to be more productive. Well, that's just not true, because productivity has gone up. Now, there's definitely an argument for and against why productivity went up. Yeah. And will it be sustained? And is it sustainable? And will you get burnout and all these other things? True. Absolutely right. But let's not kid ourselves. They're not saying get back into the office because of productivity, because that's not the data. That isn't the truth of the matter. Yeah. They're also not saying get back into the offices for environmental reasons, because there's no environmental reasons to do it. But they are saying get back into the office because they own offices. Absolutely. And I'd be a bit annoyed if I'd spent £2 billion at an office like Apple did, and then no one comes back into the office. Yeah. That would annoy me. I'd be like, well, actually, you are going to come back in the office. So we've got to be careful when we kind of think, oh, why are they stipulating get back in the office? Because it's the same as people saying get back into the fields when they own fields, or get back into the factories when they own factories. Now, the difference between the fields and the factory and now the office and now the home is we can work from home. We couldn't work from home in a factory. We couldn't work from home in a field. We couldn't work from home. But now you can. So this is a big change, Matthew. It's not just a small change. This is an absolute paradigm shift in the future of work, which is decentralized things. Now, people don't like decentralized power shifts because it freaks them out, because that's like, oh, you don't need governments anymore. Oh, we've got to be anarchy. Oh, God, you don't need the office anymore. Of course you do. People need to come and buy sandwiches from Pret Manger. Remember what the government's trying to tell you here. The government's trying to say, hey, get back into the fields. Yeah. So we've got to be really careful, because it's highly politicized. I mean, I'll give you a great example. So this is only just come out, but it's brilliant. I thought it was brilliant. I get told off for politicizing things, certainly the future of work, and I do believe it's a political angle. The reason why it's a political angle is because you're taking your means of production and you're taking ownership on your means of production, which is why the employee-employer contract is now being strained and being pulled at. Because part of the deal, wasn't it, is you went to the office and you got to know people, and you had good friends at the office, and that was part of the deal. Get rid of that part of the deal, and everyone's like, well, if you don't need offices, then I don't need to be friends with people, and I can be friends with people that I like, and I can work from home. I can work for anyone, and some people will pay me more, but some people actually I like more. So I'd rather work for something that has better values and has more purpose and autonomy and mastery. And actually, the biggest reason that people move jobs is not money, by the way. And again, look at the data on this. You can Google it. It's there's so much data in this, and it's just proven again and again and again. It's not about money. It is up to a certain amount, but this is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once you get above a certain amount of money, it's not about money, because it can't be. So you can pay, this is exactly what they're finding in law, you can pay lawyers more money, but it won't keep them. You'll just pay them more money, and they'll leave, because they're like, actually, I didn't really like working here. Oh, we'll pay you 15% more. Brilliant, thanks very much, I'll buy a new car. 3 months later, I still don't like working here. Yeah, but we can't afford to pay you anymore. well, then I'm going to leave. Now, did that person leave because you didn't pay them enough? No, because there's always going to be a fight. There's always going to be a bit where you can't pay them any more money for the job that they do, because this is the market, This is capitalism, It's the way that life is, However, you can do all the other stuff, like you can be a nicer boss, you can give them recognition, you can give them a career path. Career path, by the way, and career personal development is the highest reason people leave a job. That's the highest reason, The actual underneath bit, the highest reason is bad management and bad bosses. That's why people leave businesses. That's exactly why. And then no one likes to talk about it. Everyone goes, oh, no, it's because of money, because we don't pay them enough. No, it's not. Absolutely, because the data's there. It's absolutely not that. It's bad bosses. About 85% of people will say bad bosses or bad management, bad culture is part of the reason why they leave. You look at employee engagement at the moment, about 85% of people are not engaged at work. Yeah. Now that should scare the heck out of everybody who has a business or who has a team, because that's not just half of you. That's more than, that's 85%. But that also includes your bosses. It includes your bosses and your managers. We always think in these stats it doesn't. That means your boss doesn't really want to work there. Your manager doesn't really want to be a manager, and you don't really want to work there. So this whole thing of how did you hold people in? What was the social cohesion to make these companies work? Well, it was the office space. You take it away, and then everyone's like, actually, I'm a free agent. I can do what I like. Now, the only people who are saying I think a lot of people are saying get back into the offices. And again, this is back to completely by data. If you have a very non-diverse team, you have a very, I'm not going to say, pale, male and stale, but that's the terminology that's often used. But this is actually the case. Yeah. The older the board is, the more white they are, the more male they are, the more that there's actually the same person. They all want people to go back into the offices. And there's a direct correlation between these two. Again, Google it, you'll find the data on it. It's come over from Australia and some other places. So the less diverse you are, the more you want people back to the offices. Yeah. Now that's again should be scary for a lot of people. So this new future of work is most probably more to do with diversity and inclusion than a lot of people liked, because they weren't about that. It's more to do with using technology than a lot of people might like, because they weren't about that. And it's more to do with personal agency for the employee than a lot of people liked. A lot of people truly believe that you do your job and you get paid, and you should be lucky to have a job. Yeah, because that's my dad.
That's scarcity mindset, isn't it?
It is exactly that. It's a scarcity mindset, fixed scarcity mindset. Absolutely right. Absolutely right, Matthew. And the scary thing about it, though, is that very same mindset is the reason that these companies might not exist in 3 years' time or in 5 years' time. Because if your leader is still believing you're lucky to have a job and you're lucky to come into the office and you should shut up and not give him feedback because he doesn't like feedback, those businesses won't exist because the market won't allow, literally the dynamics of the market won't allow them to. So the biggest change you've got here is the power of the people or the employees has shifted. And employees have now got more power than ever, which is what, and by the way, I'm a great believer in it. Good on them, because for a very long time, the employee-employer contract has been skewed to one side. That's basic capitalism. That's what happens, Now you've got this bit where people are, well, I've got a laptop, I've got broadband, and I can work for anyone. Well, awesome. Viva the revolution. But make sure when you're picking a company, don't just pick it based on money, because you will get bored. If you're getting paid £80,000, literally I have friends who are getting paid £80,000 a year or more in the software world, but they're not moving to companies that are paying them £100,000. They're moving to cool companies that are paying them 70.
Yeah.
The movement isn't going for money. The movement is going for, values and purpose and mastery, autonomy, nice bosses, doing something cool with the environment, doing something cool with green tech or tech for good and these other things. Now, don't get me wrong, I know I'm very privileged and my echo chamber will, see this more and more, and it might not be a global shift. But I'm hearing a lot from recruiters that it isn't all about the money. Now, it might do, with inflation happening and these other things that are crunching us, we might all go back to only caring about the money again. We might do. But for right now, this moment, in 2022, it seems the market and the employees especially are caring about something deeper than just the money. And that's, if you can employ people based on values, which is what your flock helps you do, then you'll keep your team together for longer because it's something deeper than just the money.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It kind of sounds like then that alongside this acceleration of, remote and hybrid working, the reason some companies are struggling and seeing people leaving, whether they say it's money or not, is because actually the office was kind of the sticking plaster that was holding together groups of people that weren't really values aligned. And now people are realizing more opportunity has just opened up. So they are trying to find places where those values do align. So for any organisations, or for all organisations, I would argue they should really be keenly aware of and focusing on their values to make sure that they have got the right team to help them succeed.
No, it's absolutely right, Matthew. It's as simple as that. If you haven't asked your team about values, if you haven't asked your team, I mean, a classic you just mentioned, if you haven't asked your team almost weekly, do they want to come back into the office? Then you're not a very good, you're literally, sorry to say it, you're not a very good boss or a very good manager, because you should be asking them, and people say, well, no, that's over communicating. No, it's not. We live in a world of uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the worst things you can do to a human brain, is to give it uncertainty. Now, post-pandemic, in the world we now live in, we have mass uncertainty. Yeah. And because you don't see them every day in the office, and because they're sitting there smiling, but we all know this, we all know the lie, don't we? We all know people sitting there smiling in the office and talking to their mate going, you know what, I hate this place, I'm going to leave. And 50% of the conversations at lunchtime are, I hate this place, I'm going to leave. But most people don't, because they're too scared about what they can't go, and they haven't got the agency to leave, but they're sitting there moaning.
Yes.
Disengaged at work. They're disengaged at work, yeah? And they cause this disengagement. But if you're not talking to your people enough, then you're going to have a deep problem, because that feedback actually is what you need. You don't have the visceral feedback of the office space anymore. What you actually need is data. And you need to ask every week, oh, how are you feeling? For example, let's say, Matt, we're both caring people, and that's one of our values, yeah? And the company we're working for isn't particularly caring, but we know that our team is. And then our team leader every week says to us, hey, what could we do that's more caring this week? You'd be like, buzzing. I don't know, let's do something for charity. Let's do something nice. Let's do something we can give back. Something. And that's the level of knowledge you need to have with your team. What motivates them? Yeah. What makes them tick? Now, if you're treating everybody the same, and let's say, like we know in law firms, autonomy is a really high driver. So if you treat everybody the same and say, hey, you don't have any autonomy, come back in the office and I'm going to micromanage you, then they're going to leave. That's one of the reasons why lawyers leave. They don't. They leave because they're highly autonomous people, but they're not treated like highly autonomous people, so they leave the law firm. Yeah. The problem is that most law firms are the same. So they just jump from ship to ship. They go to a big one, go to a small one, go to another one. So the actual culture has got known for a 44% employee turnover rate. It's insane. I mean, 44, I don't even understand how they can still be businesses at that kind of rate. But of course they are, because they charge a lot of money and they bill a lot of hours and they make things very stressful. And then all that happens, Matt, is the more stressed you are in the work, the more likely you are to leave. But the problem is when people start leaving, the management have to make you work harder. So it becomes more stressful. And so you just get this spiral. You're just going to get a spiral. And then you get burnout, and then your key people leave. But if you'd asked the questions to start off with, you wouldn't have this problem. And this is the thing, Matt, and this is, again, I find this fascinating. So what we find with the data that we get is that the things that we believe to be the case often aren't the case. Yeah. So I'll give you a great example. When COVID happened and the pandemic and all these things, I presumed, because I didn't have data, I presumed that it would be, it would have been young people that wanted to stay at home. Yeah, and when I say young, like under 35, because I'm 46. So let's say under 35s would want to stay at home because they had fun lives and they were playing the PlayStations, whatever, all this nonsense you come up with in your own narrative, which is all rubbish. Yeah. And old people want to get back into the office because they're old-fashioned and they're boring and blah, blah. It's the exact opposite. It's literally in law, in the companies that we work with in law, it's the opposite. Young people want to get back into the offices. Older people want to stay at home. Now, how is that? But if you say to everyone, everyone's coming back to the office, just everyone's coming back to the office, full stop, you're going to annoy most of your key players because they don't want to come back to the office, but you've never asked them. And then they leave and they go somewhere, as the great stats know from Gallup, it's something like 93% of people want to have flexibility about where they're working. Yeah. And then 73% want when they work. Yeah, so this is the whole asynchronous kind of thing. Now, if you stop that level of flexibility, you're going to piss off like most of the people that work for you, but they're most probably not going to say we're annoyed. They're just going to wait and then leave.
Yeah, people are quite bad at raising these type of things, aren't they?
Exactly. Yeah, and so if you're not asking the right questions, most probably using a piece of technology so it can scale, then it's the great unsaid, and so the great unsaid is the deepest problem because. It's if all you're doing is doing exit interviews, most people lie in an exit interview. They won't tell you the reason. They'll say, I went because they're offering me more money. And you go, we'll offer you more money. And they go, yeah, I still want to go. Well, what about if we match it? you'd have to, what about 10% more? Well, okay, maybe. And all you're doing is keeping a toxic employee. That's all you're doing. You're just paying more now, and you think you've kept them. So HR people, they're literally going, well, if we gave them more money, they'll stay. They will, but they wanted to leave anyway. You just don't know why they wanted to leave because you've never bothered to ask them, and that's just bad management.
Yeah, and there's what damage are they doing, whilst they do stay, not just productivity-wise, but also, how are they kind of sharing their perspective with other employees, other team members, etc. as well? How are they influencing their viewpoint?
Well, and they will be, because we all know the whole classic bad apple thing, don't we? It doesn't take very much to... And the thing is, if you are a manager and you haven't got the feedback and you haven't got, who needs one-to-ones, what are the values of the team, what are the behaviours that we're driving in the company that are making people more disengaged or more engaged? And all this, by the way, if you're listening to the podcast and you're like, what the hell is he talking about? And you are a manager, you have to go online and find out what I'm talking about. Yeah. The whole point about being a leader rather than a manager, if you are literally thinking, I don't know what he's talking about, that's okay, because everybody's understanding begins at one point. Yeah. And we've got to be really open to learning new stuff, because this next jump and this next paradigm shift means that a lot of people have to learn new skills. And a lot of those skills are what we call the soft skills. And I hate calling them soft because they're actually harder than the hard skills. But it's not about technically how good you are technically anymore. It's how well do you manage and work with a team, because that's what keeps companies together. It's the emotional intelligence. I mean, this is actually the reason I invested in your flock, because I lack emotional intelligence. And I knew that was a problem area for me. In fact, the double irony, Matt, is I tried to build your flock and couldn't get the team together to stay together for long enough to build the thing about team dynamics. Double irony. Yeah. There you go. So I already knew that I had the problem. But a lot of managers, and I'm not going to say it's mainly male managers because I don't have the data to support that, but it's certainly something that I would think might ring true and resonate with many. Because we don't have, and certainly people who become managers because they're technically good at what they do. So they rise through the ranks only because they're very good. We get this in coding and in law especially, which again are very male-dominated industries. And so what happens is you are a lawyer, you're billing loads and you're very good at what you do, and then you become the kind of team leader or the manager of these other lawyers who are coming through. But you've never done management training. You don't have any skills in management. You're not a people person. And deep down, you don't really care about people. But you want to be able to build more, become a partner and build more, and therefore build more, And so you break all your junior staff. And you say, well, the reason why I do this is because that's what happened to me. Yeah. And then we hear that.
Yeah, we see a lot of that.
We do, don't you? You always see a lot of it. This is the way that I did it 20 years ago, so therefore we should do the same. The problem is the next generation of people, because of COVID, because of the pandemic, because of all the technology we have, I don't think they're going to accept that. They're not going to say, it's a bit like saying, oh, I'm abusive because my father was abusive. It's that level of misunderstanding of self-awareness. It's literally saying, well, the reason why the world's bad is because it was bad before. Well, no, that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable behaviour. You can't just go.
Absolutely, and I think
you can't just do that.
You can, and I've seen managers promoted because they were technically good at what they did, and therefore that was seen as a way of rewarding that. But I've also seen managers that weren't technically good enough and promoted out of the way of the other team members. And I think regardless of the reason for them being promoted, when they do become managers, a lot of them are like, I've got no idea what it even means to be a manager. Therefore, someone above me is going to be measuring me on my effectiveness because I'm not doing all of the work anymore. They must be holding me accountable for my team's productivity. Therefore, I need to micromanage.
Exactly. So you have the other side of it, which is one of the worst things in the world, which is micromanagement. And then people leave. And that's exactly it. So people don't leave bad businesses. They leave bad bosses or bad team managers or team leaders or whatever. And it's the management thing. What we've got to realise here is it's not about management. It's about leading. So if you are good enough, ask yourself the deep question. Why should anyone be led by me? Because that's what you're doing now. It's servant leadership. You are leading people, and you're not necessarily leading from the front, because leading from the front doesn't work either. It's like one of my favourite quotes was from a CEO, and he said, my job as a CEO actually is to create an environment where my team do the best work. And that's what his job was. And his also his job was to recruit and get investment, etc. Now that company's doing very well, and everyone likes working there, and people don't leave. And the reason being is the CEO sees it as his job to be the culture and people person for the business, which it is. Yeah. He's leading that company. Now, you've also then got to have a similar leadership kind of mentality in all your team leaders. And the team leader says, well, my job partly, if they're a lawyer at the same time or if they're a coder at the same time, is to do some coding. Yeah, I'll do some lawyering, fine. But actually, if I've got 10 people underneath me, it's to create the environment where everyone likes working here. And the thing is, you rightly said, is now because we've lost the office space, people are missing the fact that they have to go and see their team. We talk about conscious gathering, and we talk about this. It feels a lot of time that I'm arguing against the office space. I'm not. I'm just telling the stats out there say people don't want to go back to the office space, but that's because the office space was a bad thing anyway. It was a factory. Remember, we had factories, and then we had offices and factories, and all we did is put more offices on top of offices. It wasn't. It's an organic process that actually, if you think about it, didn't serve a fundamental human thing. It was just a construct.
No, it's very factory-like, and as a slight aside, you've literally just reminded me of a previous company I worked for. They had a big open plan office spaces, is often the norm, lots of developers there, etc. And the manager there built himself an office inside the office. It was 3 walls and a big glass wall on one side where he would sit at his desk overseeing all of the staff, and he would occasionally exit his office and shout at people, then return again. It was a ridiculous scenario that would be, comedy if it wasn't true.
Oh no, and absolutely right. And then you wonder, these same companies might wonder, why aren't people coming back to the office? How come they were more productive when I wasn't shouting at them and I didn't talk to them? This is the toxic masculinity problem that we have in the modern office space. And I do use those words, carefully, but also I think correctly. It is a masculinity problem, and that doesn't mean it's male, but it's a masculinity problem. There's also a toxic problem, and it is the classic. I've got this glass office, and I come out and I shout at people. Because that is exactly what happens, yeah. But then make them work faster. So I give them a whip, and occasionally I give them a raise, and then we have beers at 4:00. And everyone sits around for the beers, and what a great team atmosphere we have. And we have a ping pong table that no one ever uses, and beanbags for no reason. One of the reasons why is because this person would have looked at Google or something and said, that's how Google did it. And I always use Google or other people like that as an example, because what you're actually seeing there is the stuff on top, like the free beers and by the way, the real danger of creating a drinking culture. But so the free beers, let's say, or the free food, or the ping pong tables, or whatever it is, whatever cliches you've got in your own mind with them. That's the stuff on the top. 90% of it is actually about company culture and people liking each other. And that means that beers work on a Friday because they do it organically. Like everyone would stop work and go, do anyone fancy just chilling out for a bit together? Or playing hacky sack or whatever. But they did that. You didn't give them a hacky sack and say, right, everyone 4:00, stop work, let's all play hacky sack. Because that's the wrong way round. Because of course, in companies that liked each other and that sat outside and went to the beach together, of course they had surfing holidays together. You look at really clever companies like Buffer or Basecamp and some other folk, and you look at those companies and you can see that they don't have a problem recruiting talent. And the reason why they don't is because they have great places to work, but also underpinning it is a great company culture, which includes things like we're remote first rather than remote forced. Everyone's flexible and async. You can do your work when you want it. It's objective based. People are nice to each other most of the time. And by the way, every 3 months, we're going to go on a company retreat somewhere in the world, which we'll pay for you to go to, and we'll all meet up together. Yeah. Now, that's either been created by luck. That's just cool people doing cool stuff, which makes a cool company culture. Or someone has come in and gone, hey, wouldn't it be great if we also asked everyone what they would like? And everyone's voted for it and said, I tell you what, I need to be able to meet people. I'm a coder and I'm very productive at home, but every week or so I want to be able to meet people or go on a Zoom call together or do something. There's so many other things you can do as well as pay people more. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're not paying people the market rate, that's a problem. But I can also guarantee you can pay people under the market rate. If you're a startup and other things, you can't afford to pay them the market rate because you've got a great company culture, because people will move to a startup and get paid less money because they want to do something cool with autonomy, mastery and purpose. This is what people do. Otherwise, startups wouldn't exist. Everyone would just work for massive corporations, and startups could never afford to match their wage, and no one would ever do it.
Indeed, yeah.
Or people, the CTO wouldn't leave a huge company and then start his own and then do a really cool thing. But you can see it happening again and again and again. This will happen, right? You've then got other things like if you can recognize people and you can get feedback from them and you're nice to them. Now, don't get me wrong. There's other things like if they're working from home, you should provide them with a good chair or a good seat, or the office environment at home should be the same as the office environment in the office. Just because you've saved £2,000 or more per person, that money shouldn't be just your profit. That money should be ploughed back into the company culture, which includes chairs and all these other things you do at home, but also people. Don't get me wrong. We've got your flock here, and it's there to help teams stay together for longer. But it doesn't replace people. It just gives people the data they need to know their teams better, so then they can be nicer. It just gives you data how to be nicer, make happy people. It doesn't get rid of the person. So the person has to consciously start thinking, okay, what does my team need and want? Find out from their team. Like, loads of people want to go back to offices, but obviously if you might not be able to afford an office 5 days a week if people only want to go back 1 day a week. But then it's most probably not an office that you need. You just need a place where you can all meet once a week. Well, you could make that anywhere in the world. Like, you could meet in a park because it's a nice day. I don't want to say it, but when you break out the circle of it have to be in school, it could be anywhere, couldn't it? And this is where we're moving to now, as Bruce Daisley says in his newsletter. We're moving from this kind of school mentality to maybe but a bit more of a college or university kind of vibe. Like, you've got to have agency and you've got to enjoy your time. And if you don't, you're not productive, then you don't pass the course. But really, you didn't have to turn up at 9 o'clock every time. Sometimes you didn't turn up to lessons, but you got notes from a friend. It's like we've got to treat employees now. I think we've got to treat them much more like adults than perhaps we have been before. And certainly for the knowledge sectors that we primarily work with your flock, the way to keep your team together for longer is to get the feedback from them as adults, get to know them as adults and as individuals, and then use data to make sure that your decisions for the future are based on that feedback, not just, I think everyone should come back to the office, or I think we should all go out for dinner. Because lots of times, there are lots of reasons why people don't come to the 4:30 beers on a Friday. And it could be they're introverted. It could be they've got kids. It could be they don't drink. I mean, you can't have a blanket.
There's a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. Reasons. Yeah. And it's doing it, as you say, for the right way round, isn't it? It's not saying, oh, we're going to start doing this now because these people over here did it, but they did it because that's what they wanted to do. And it then makes the question of should we come back to the office kind of irrelevant if you just ask people and have a way to get the data, as you say.
Absolutely. And it could be, the reason why I'm so passionate about remote work is because underneath it all, there's a diversity inclusion piece, which is if you allow people to work in different ways and you start to deconstruct jobs, because remember, jobs is just a construct, and the future of work actually will be not having jobs, but having particular roles. And it's going to be a really fascinating world. Because if you're objective-based driven, you could actually have several jobs at the same time, working, almost working like a freelancer, but for different companies, doing a similar role, but doing a small amount of it. Or you could decide and say, hey, this week I'm only going to do, or this month I'm only going to do, 2/3 of that because I've got, So I suppose what I'm trying to get to is we've got a chance here, a bit like with call centres many moons ago. Those people who understood the technology jump, instead of telling everyone to get into the call centre, which was a horrible environment and no one liked, they said, do it at home and do it when you want and log in when you want to. Yeah. And so instead of having 1,000 people work for them, they had 10,000 part-time people. But by doing that, you allowed people who were disabled, who wouldn't normally go into the office and wouldn't be able to do all this stuff. You allowed them to do it because you gave them the kit to do it. You allowed single mums to do it for a couple of hours because they only had a couple of hours. Yeah, but that's awesome because that means you've then got diversity and inclusion in your piece, which means your company is more resilient. There's a proven fact that diversity and inclusion means that you make about 20% more money in your bottom line. The reason why I harp on about it so much in technology is because we're building bad technology products because we're not diverse and inclusive enough. It's not just the fact that it's the morally right thing to do. You actually make better companies and better products. If we don't all act like Uber, the world's going to be a better place. But the reason we did is because they were started by blokes, and it was a very blokey culture. And you could argue, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but if we were a lot more conscious about how we recruit and what we create, then the world changes with us. Your flock is just one small part of that change, which is why I'm so passionate about it. Because as I say, if we can help people be happier at work, because if you're happier at work, you're then normally happier at home. Yeah, you're happier in a variety of different ways, and that makes the world better because then you're doing, you're not so cross. So because you're not commuting and because you're not angry about your commute, and we could cut down on how many people crash their cars because they're not so cross rushing to get to work. Yeah, or we could. It would most probably make a difference to how many violent crime because people aren't snapping because of burnout. I don't know. There's lots of other things that happen when you make the world of work a happier place to be. there's a load more spin-offs in the end of it. And I think what we've actually done is made the world of work quite an unhappy place to be for quite a long time. And we've, as you said, we've used the office as a plaster over the top and try to hold it all together. But actually, deep down, there's always been some deep problems. And I think as long as we get the feedback and get to know our people better, that we've got much more of a chance to build resilient teams and companies that are happier places to work. And by doing so, not only do we affect our bottom line, but we affect productivity. And let's not kid ourselves, productivity is going to be a key factor in the future of work, because without that productivity, with a recession potentially coming, we're going to have to be more productive. But I can only say we can only become more productive by not burning out and being happier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's 100% true. And I think that's a great vision and mission alongside it to be aligned to, is let's make it happier, more resilient place to be. And yeah, I think that's a really great way to kind of summarize what we talked about so far. And I want to be respectful of your time as well. But just before we do wrap things up, in terms of your flock itself, and you've obviously talked a lot about the data and the way it can help kind of scale, getting some of that feedback as well. What's next for your flock? Kind of what do you see the future of your flock being?
No, and you're absolutely right. That one of the deepest problems, I think, sometimes with the gains in technology that we have, is that it becomes, and certainly this next bit with artificial intelligence, it becomes this moment where we have to be really careful of what path we choose. And sometimes technology is used to get people out of the equation, and that can be okay. Sometimes, for example, when we started using computers, a lot of things like Excel doesn't have any bias in it at all. It's just a calculator. You could argue computers themselves are just a calculator. The thing with artificial intelligence, though, of course, is it depends on the data set that you use. And so, 4 plus 4 doesn't always equal 8. And it's a lot more nuanced to this. And the whole point, even if you're not doing artificial intelligence, it's machine learning. And most of these things are actually machine learning rather than artificial intelligence. But to make it an easier world, we just say it's artificial intelligence. And there's a big deep danger with confirmation bias, but also with the data sets they've been used and created on. So it's similar to a human being. If you teach a human being that African names are complicated and African names are associated with low performance, then that formula is a racist formula. It's not necessarily true, but you could run a data set through it which says that's 100% true. Every single time someone's not called Tom and they're called Jill, well, Jill leaves and Tom stays. Well, the algorithm then says all Toms are good. Now, people believe that it's not more nuanced than that, but actually, artificial intelligence at the moment is about the intelligence of about an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old. So if you're giving your recruitment strategy or you're allowing a 12-year-old to pick the people for your team, that's a fundamental problem, because if that 12-year-old believes that white people who are called Tom are the best people for you to employ, you're going to employ a load of white people called Tom. Now, that's okay, but that doesn't work for a team, and it doesn't work from a diversity inclusion point. But a slightly deeper, and thankfully slightly deeper reason is it doesn't actually work for the company either. If recruitment was as easy as just get the same people in all the time and your company does well, then we'd have a slightly different world that we lived in. But it doesn't. Luckily for well, not even luckily, it's just evolution proves the point. If you do monoculturalism in farming, it fails. If you're only one species in the sea, it fails. This is an ecosystem we live in. It has to have diversity and inclusion as its very nature of being. So the AI systems might create purity, and they create but they create an issue for you, and that's why we can't rely on AI systems. We've got to bring the human back into, or the humane, should I say, back into human resources. But we've got to be really worried about abrogating our responsibility about team dynamics into an AI system that we don't understand ourselves. Because all we're wanting is the output, and the output, though, it would be negative for us, but we wouldn't understand how it's working.
You can't ask why, can you?
So I think what you're going to... No, exactly. These black boxes don't allow you to ask why. But even worse, though, Matt, is that people might not even ask it that anyway. They'll just go, churn through the numbers, 500 applications, blah, 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 right? They're the 3 you picked. Right, let's crack on. Because sometimes they might not care. Also, sometimes it might actually reinforce their own confirmation bias. So they're like, oh, the machine's right, I'm right, the machine's right. And we all know the classic, computer says no, that happened in banking quite a bit ago when we removed bankers from the equations and computers said no, credit score systems and all this other stuff that can be gamed. And we've got to be really careful because recruitment's a lot deeper. I think a lot deeper, bigger thing for us. So we've just got to be. I think we've got to be really careful. So for your flock, we're not going to use AI systems for that very reason. We do have a very diverse data set, but we're doing machine learning, and machine learning is just how do you get better at and how can you help people more using learning development around the values to create more aligned teams. That's a very rich data area anyway, and it doesn't need any confirmation bias and it doesn't touch recruitment. So we're very happy to do that. That will then most probably start to align more with AI as AI becomes more prevalent, but that's because every company in the world will be using AI in some description at some point in the company. We are not. We're a tech company, and if we want to scale a tech company, which we do, AI will be part of it, whether it really is AI rather than machine learning, and I don't want to get too geeky about it, but there you go. But the actual, the exciting bit for your flock won't be moving into AI systems, even though we have data that could do so. It's actually much more about how do you integrate with the ecosystem that exists.
Right.
So at the moment, your flock is very much a standalone SaaS product, which you do and you can do for 6 months, and you help your team stay together for longer, which is awesome. But if your flock then tapped into Slack and that communication channel rather than emails, or into WhatsApp and that communication channel as we become more hybrid and more remote, I think they're the exciting bits for us as a company, because that's exciting. And how do you help more people? And you can help more teams if you become more mobile based rather than desktop based. That's just the nature of the modern work is going to be much more mobile. So that's the bit that I'm excited about for your flock. As we scale, we can go back into mobile more, and because we can go back into mobile more, we can hit different markets and we can help more people. So I'd love to see your flock being used by the hospitality sector, and helping bar and restaurant teams become happier at work. Awesome, because they're not particularly happy at work, which is why the churn rate's so high in those particular industries. I don't think we're going to be used by everybody, but of course, as an investor in the company, but also as someone who wants to help 1 million people, I want the more people to use the better. And so I think our next bit will be stepping into mobile, then most probably into AI. But if you ever see your flock in the metaverse, we've gone one bridge too far, Matthew.
Fair enough. We're not there quite yet. Not augmented reality.
No, exactly. And I've done this before, of course. So if I come back to you in a year, so we're launching a VR course, just say, Dan, you did this with augmented reality. You're going a bit early. Just have deep pockets.
Yeah, definitely. But I can certainly see what you're saying with the mobile angle. We were talking to someone on the podcast yesterday morning, actually, and they're involved with corporate intranets. Helping, sharing knowledge within large enterprises, and they were also talking about making things mobile, and certain people in certain companies, they're not all going to be desk based in the first place instance anyway. So actually that mobile expansion I can see as a definitely an interesting point in terms of reaching people that they otherwise couldn't reach, but also giving people more natural kind of communication mechanisms that come along with hybrid working in many ways.
No, absolutely. And if we were if we are lucky enough to get the next tranche of investment, and we hope and pray that we can, that's where a good 80% of our development time will be spent. Will be how do you kind of almost backward engineer this inside a WhatsApp or a Slack environment, because that's where it should be. It should naturally be in there. It's just at the moment our customers don't use Slack. Lawyers and professional services don't use Slack. They use Office 365. They use emails. They use those things. I don't personally want to go into the Office 365 environment to build this. For a load of reasons which are based on my dislike of the company from 10 years ago, which are no longer relevant because their CEO's completely changed, and so is Microsoft as a company, which is why it's doing so well. Their company culture, in fact, has completely changed. They're now much more diverse and inclusive than ever before, and I believe that's to do with the rise of their company as well. If you look at how Microsoft now treat competitors or the ecosystem, it's completely different to what they did 10 years ago. So it might be quite good. Microsoft have also built their own version of your flock, to be completely honest. So they're not going to buy us out. They've already built their own, because they know this space is really exciting. And that's a really good, really exciting thing for us, is when you see large companies also doing what we're doing, because it proves that this is the future of work, and they know it. So we probably won't be partnering with that organisation as of yet. I think if we did, I'd be really interested to see where that would go, because you've then got the depth of LinkedIn knowledge. There's with the rest of the calendar systems and the booking systems. There's lots of other stuff you could do in the 365 environment. But I think we're more of a pirate ship. We're more of a startup. We're more of kind of we'd most probably link much more into Slack and WhatsApp than we would do with Microsoft.
I see.
But that's
exciting.
That's most probably that's a company culture thing. I think that's more of a company culture thing than anything else. But yeah, it should be really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, certainly we'll be watching to see how things develop. And for anyone that's listening to the podcast that wants to find out more about either your flock itself or any of the topics that we've talked about, are there any kind of recommendations? Where should they head to?
Well, the first recommendation, of course, go to our website. Why not? Which is www.yourflock.co.uk and check out what we do there. Also, find myself, Dan Sodergren, on LinkedIn, or Michal Wisniewski. It's probably easier to spell my name than Michal's, but
yeah, we'll put LinkedIn links in the notes as well.
There you go. Absolutely, put links, rightly so. I'm very lucky because of lots of the reading I do and research stuff. I produce every 2 weeks a newsletter, which is subscribed by quite a few people subscribe to it, which is around the future of work. So that's a good thing, and free as well. So that's a good free resource you could use. And then I would honestly say, if you're really interested in this area, have a look at one of the blogs that we just wrote, actually, because I just wrote a list of a reading list that I created for over the summer, so that you could have a look at, or over any time, of course. You could then look at, because there's a good 30 or so books on there, and they are amazing books. And I think if you've only just started looking into this first, you're thinking of dipping your toes into it, start with those books first and some rounded knowledge around these concepts, and then use something like Your Flock. And believe me, and I don't mean it's disrespectful for Your Flock. Your Flock is one of the things you can use. There's lots of other things you could use. Your Flock's kind of secret sauce is it links into values, into something slightly deeper, and therefore we found it resonates and works with the market. But there's heck, you could just ask people through SurveyMonkey, or Typeform. Just ask your people. To ask 10, 20, 30 people, do whatever you want, but make sure you've got a way of, don't just get the data and then do nothing with it. This is one of the biggest problems that we find with this world, is that business leaders understand they've got to ask the question. So they ask the question, but then they don't act on it. And that's what Your Flock helps you do and helps team leaders do. You get the answers back, but then Your Flock will say, well, based on those answers, maybe try this. And based on the values, therefore you could do that. And so, by the way, Jimmy wants a one-to-one, but Sarah really wants you to become more caring in the company. Well, actually, Tom has decided that that as you need a one-to-one, but he's a 3 out of 10 in engagement. So you've got to look at Tom, because Tom might leave, but it gives you those points that you can look at. I don't think you'd get them if you did that just with Typeform and other things. It becomes, you just have data overwhelm. The whole point of the Your Flock system is it gives you those clear pointers to work on very quickly as a team leader, and saves you hours, if not days, of work. And that's why it's an exciting place to be. But we are one of a multitude of different SaaS products and consultancies that you could use. But start with your own education. Start by learning stuff yourself. Get excited. Get passionate at work. Start loving again what you do. And I think as soon as people love what they do, this is what my TED Talk talks about. The future of work isn't going to be what you think, and it's not necessarily what you feel. It's actually what you love. And if you find that you love being a manager and love leading people and want to change people's lives, then you're perfect for doing it. And get your own agency and enjoy your lives and do it, and make your own people be happier at work. Obviously, we'd love you to use Your Flock to do so, because that's our job. But do it yourselves and come and tell me what you've been up to. I love feedback from everyone. If you've read one of the books and you liked it, then do tell us. But they can find us quite easily on LinkedIn, and very happy to do so. So always happy to chat about the future of work.
Fantastic. And thank you very much, and thank you very much for your time today as well. I don't really have anything to add other than to echo what you've just said and encourage people to listen to that advice and go and actually act on it. So I think that's a great place to leave it. Keep us both posted as to how you get on. But Dan, I'm sure we will talk again in future and find out how the future of work is changing and what that may evolve into. But thank you for your time today.
No, it's been fantastic. Thank you, Matt. You're a star, and hopefully speak to you in the near future.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Scale Up. Remember, for the show notes and in-depth resources from today's guest, you can find these on the website insidethescaleup.com. You can also leave feedback on today's episode, as well as suggest guests and companies you'd like to hear from. Thank you for listening.